woman had what today we refer to as a near-death experience. And while she was in heaven for just a moment, she asked God, she said, "Is this it? Is this the end for me?" God says, "Oh no, you probably have 30 or 40 more years of life before the end." So she was much relieved, and she went back to earth, and she woke up very cheered by the news that she heard, and she decided before she left the hospital that she was going to have all the plastic surgery that she could possibly have. She was going to have a tummy tuck and a facelift and all those things. Because after all, if she's going to live 30 or 40 years, she's going to make the most of it. And so when she's done with all this, she's been in the hospital for a long time, she walks out into the street and she gets hit by a bus and killed. And she gets up in heaven and she is hopping mad. She says, "God, you told me that I had 30 or 40 years left, and look what happened." God looks at her, and all of a sudden he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He says, "I just didn't recognize you." Today I want to talk about identity, about who we are. I remember from my days at Virginia Seminary that we often talked about identity. Everyone, all of us, were having an identity crisis of one form or another. I remember that we talked so much about it that one of our professors, one day at lunch, he turned to us and he said, "You know, where do you expect to find your identity? You expect to turn over a rock somewhere and find it underneath the rock." I think what he was trying to tell us was that we already knew who we were. We just needed to live into that, to know what that meant. I had dinner recently with some folks who are all unchurched, and I meet with them frequently, and for some reason I think they're a little bit uncomfortable about the fact that I'm a priest, and they somehow like to talk about religion all the time, which kind of surprises me. But one person who was actually raised in the church, she said that when she was a little girl, she always liked to ask her father to read the Christmas story from Mark's gospel instead of Luke's gospel because it was so much shorter. I started to think about that, and I realized that there is no Christmas story in Mark's gospel. What we have today for our gospel is the very beginning of that gospel. And it started me really thinking about that, because in the other gospels there's been some lead up to what happens to Jesus at his baptism. But if we take it just what we have in Mark's gospel, Jesus goes out to the Jordan to be baptized, just like a lot of other people do. And all of a sudden, he comes up out of the water and the heavens open and the voice of God booms out, "You are my well-beloved Son." Wow, can you imagine if that had the first that he knows about this, all of a sudden, he's confronted with this booming voice from heaven telling him who he is, telling him what the rest of his life is going to be like. It's no wonder that he needed 40 days in the wilderness to process all of the massive changes that were taking place in his life. The learning curve, at least in Mark's gospel, is very steep. I remember that the bishop who confirmed me, he was a really big man, Bishop of Alabama. He had been a wrestler before he went to seminary. He had huge hands and a booming voice. And that was enough to impress me. But I also remember what he said to all of us who were being confirmed that day. He said, "Remember who you are and remember what you represent." Remember who you are and remember what you represent. When I heard those words, I certainly had no understanding of the kind of world that I was going to live in, the changes that I would see in my lifetime. And he didn't either. None of us could have. What he was trying to do for us, I think, was to give us something to hold on to as we went into the future. Now that phrase, remember who you are and what you represent, can be an excuse to hold on to the past and not move forward. But there are some guiding principles that I think he intended for us to take with us as we went forth into our future. Remember who you are, and remember what you represent. And Jesus, this was his experience of being told that same thing, being told who he was. You are my well-beloved Son. That's a pretty clear message of his identity. Now, Lent, it seems to me, is a time for us to renew our identity. I know that we're just at the very beginning of Lent, and that some of you are probably still trying to figure out what you're going to do with this time. I want to suggest that Lent is a time for us to get to know ourselves better. It may lead to some identity crises, perhaps, and that might not be a bad thing. But knowing ourselves means knowing the good and the bad, the positive and the negative. Our identity includes it all. As you think about what to give up or what to take on for this Lenten season, I want to stress that it should be something that challenges you. It should not be something that you can do easily. It should be something that reminds you every day, and perhaps many times a day, that this is a special season, that this time is different. This time is set aside. It's a time for us to sacrifice and to prepare for the coming season of Easter. The reason that it needs to be hard is that if it's too easy, it's likely to lead to pride. Look what I did. I'm such a good person. The whole intent of this season is for us to draw closer to God. And we're not very interested in getting closer to God if we think that we can handle all of this ourselves. Your observance of Lent should be something that challenges you. Chuck Murphy, who was an entertainer turned Episcopal priest, used to say, I cannot stand up in front of you folks and tell you to give up something for Lent when I know that I can't even stay on a diet. To be honest with you, when I look back just these past few days, the first few days of Lent, I've already blown it. All the things that I intended to do, I really haven't done. What I'm learning, as have learned so many times, it's hard for me. It's hard for all of us to give up some of our old habits. I'm less in control of my life than I realize. Lent is our wilderness experience. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness. It says in the day's gospel, it doesn't tell us much about the time in the wilderness, but it does tell us that he was with wild beasts. He had wild beasts to deal with. It also tells us that he was ministered to in the wilderness by angels. My prayer for all of us as we go walk this road of Lent is that we will meet a few of our own wild beasts. Not that we'll be overwhelmed by them, but we'll see them and know them. And also that we will also experience the ministry of angels. We don't get much encouragement in this culture to enter into the wilderness. Basically, our culture doesn't want us to experience anything that's painful or difficult. We're probably in the habit of running away from all our problems. But Lent is the time for us to face them head on. We have a hope. We have a hope as Christians that is beyond all the wild beasts that we may encounter in this world and in this Lent. We have a Savior who has gone before us, We have the promise of new life at the end of our wilderness experience. May this Lent be filled with hope and with challenge as we grow in our life as the people of God. Amen.
Amen.